Sometimes the scariest stories aren't legends, they're real. Tonight, you'll hear three true horror encounters. Stories that prove evil can be anywhere. From a silent apartment across the hall, to a phone call that shouldn't have existed, to something waiting in the woods. These are three terrifying true stories that'll keep you up tonight. When I first moved into my apartment, I thought I'd finally found the perfect place to start over. It was in an older brick building downtown, tucked between a laundromat and a coffee shop that always smelled like cinnamon. Rent was cheap, utilities were included, and it was close enough to walk to work. The place had character, the kind of old charm that made you feel like you were part of something that had been there forever. The hallway lights buzzed faintly, the floors creaked with every step, and sometimes, if you listened closely, you could hear a faint humming sound through the walls. I figured it was just the old pipes. My unit was 5B. Right across the narrow hall was 5C. When I first moved in, I noticed the door immediately. It looked the same as the others, except the brass numbers were dull, and the doorframe had a thin crack running down one side. There was no name tag, no doormat, no sign that anyone lived there. During my first week, I never saw anyone go in or out of 5C. I thought maybe it was vacant, the kind of apartment they use for storage or keep locked up for repairs. The landlord, a woman named Marlene, lived on the second floor. She was nice enough, in a quiet sort of way. When I asked her about 5C while signing the lease, she hesitated before answering. "Oh, that one's unoccupied right now," she said quickly, flipping through papers. "Don't worry about it." I didn't. Not then. The first strange thing happened about 10 days after I moved in. It was around 11:30 p.m., and I was taking my trash out to the chute at the end of the hall. The lights flickered slightly, and I remember thinking how eerily quiet the building was that night. As I walked past 5C, I heard something from inside. It was faint, but it sounded like whispering, a voice, low and muffled, like someone talking softly to themselves, just beyond the door. I stopped. The sound stopped too. I leaned in a little, thinking maybe I was imagining it. Then, clear as day, I heard my name. Just once. Whispered, almost lovingly. "Alex?" I froze. My heart started racing. No one in the building knew me by name. I'd barely spoken to anyone except Marlene. After a few seconds, I told myself I must have misheard. Maybe it was the pipes, or the wind, or the TV from another unit. I hurried back inside, locked the door, and turned on every light. I didn't sleep much that night. Over the next week, little things started to happen. Sometimes, late at night, I'd hear faint tapping sounds from across the hall. Not footsteps, just slow, deliberate knocks. 3 in a row. Pause. Then again. One morning, when I left for work, I noticed something under my doormat. A folded piece of paper. Inside, written in shaky pencil, were the words, "I hear you too." I stood there in the hallway for a long time, just staring at it. I didn't know what that meant. I knocked on 5C's door that evening. No answer. I pressed my ear against it. Silence. I went downstairs and asked Marlene if someone had moved into that apartment. Her face went pale. "No," she said quickly. "There's nobody in there. That unit's been sealed since last year." "Sealed," I repeated. She nodded, then glanced toward the stairwell like she didn't want to be overheard. "Look, that apartment had issues. Plumbing, wiring, mold. We had to close it off. Don't go near it, okay?" She said it so firmly that I didn't ask again. But that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was in there. A few nights later, around 2 a.m., I woke up to a strange noise. It sounded like dragging. Something heavy, being pulled across the floor just outside my door. I sat up listening. The noise stopped. Then, 3 soft knocks. Right at my door this time. I didn't move, didn't even breathe. After a full minute, I crept to the peephole. The hallway was empty. The light flickered once, then steadied. I stood there staring until my eyes hurt. But there was no one. When I finally went back to bed, I could still hear faint whispering coming from the hall. But now, it wasn't just one voice. There were 2. The next morning, I checked my doorbell camera. I'd installed it mostly for deliveries, but it had motion detection. At 2:13 a.m., the camera had recorded movement. I opened the clip. The video showed the hallway, dim and quiet. Then slowly, the door to 5C opened. Only a few inches, and through the gap, a shadow leaned out. Tall, narrow, unmoving. It didn't step forward. It just stood there, facing directly toward my camera. After about 10 seconds, the door closed again. No sound, no movement. I can't explain why, but I felt cold all over when I watched that clip. Like I was seeing something I wasn't supposed to. I brought it to Marlene later that day. She refused to watch the whole thing. "That's not possible," she whispered. "That apartment doesn't have power." The locks were changed months ago. She promised she'd check it out. That night, when I got home from work, there was police tape across 5C's door. For a few days, things were quiet. Then one evening, I came home to find the tape torn down. The door to 5C was wide open. The hallway lights were dim, flickering more than usual. I should have gone straight into my apartment, but curiosity got the better of me. I stepped closer. Inside, everything was dark, except for a faint glow from a TV sitting on the floor. It was playing static, just white noise. The apartment smelled like dust and something faintly metallic. There was no furniture, no curtains, no sign of anyone living there. But in the center of the room, written across the floor in black marker, were words scrawled over and over. "I hear you too," dozens of times, covering the walls, the floor, even the inside of the door. I backed out slowly, heart pounding. That's when I heard it again. "Alex," right behind me. I turned around. The hallway was empty, but the door to my own apartment was now open. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on the couch with the lights on, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. I thought maybe someone was messing with me, maybe a squatter or some prank. But then I remembered what Marlene said. No power, no access. The next morning, I packed a bag and went straight to her office. She looked exhausted, like she hadn't slept either. Before I could say anything, she said quietly, "I called maintenance to inspect 5C yesterday. They said the door was still sealed. No one's been in there." I stared at her. I saw it open. I went inside. Her face went blank. "That's not possible," she said. "The keys were removed last year. After the tenant." I asked what she meant. She hesitated for a long time, then said there was a man living there. He wasn't well. Complained about hearing things through the walls. Said someone kept calling his name. One night, the neighbors heard him screaming. By the time we got the door open, he was gone. "Gone?" I asked. She nodded. Vanished. No sign of him. Police never figured it out. I moved out 2 days later. On my last morning, as I was carrying boxes down the hall, I glanced once more at 5C. The door was closed. No tape. No noise. But when I passed by, I noticed something small wedged under the frame. A folded piece of paper. It looked old, yellowed around the edges. I shouldn't have picked it up, but I did. Inside, in shaky handwriting, it said, "Don't move out, Alex. We're just getting started." I dropped it and ran. A few weeks after I left, I got a call from an unknown number. When I answered, there was nothing at first, just faint static. Then, in that same calm whisper, "Alex." I hung up immediately, blocked the number. A few days later, a package arrived at my new address. No return label. Inside was a small flash drive. When I plugged it in, there was only one video file. It was from a hallway security camera, time-stamped the night before I moved out. It showed me carrying boxes to the elevator. Then from across the hall, the door to 5C opened just a crack, and a pale hand reached out, holding that same folded note. Sometimes I think about that apartment, about how something could linger like that, not just in a place, but in a person's name. Every once in a while, late at night, I'll get a call from unknown. I never answer anymore. But sometimes, if I listen closely, I swear I can hear a faint whisper on the line. My name. Alex. And I know it's still there, waiting across the hall. I drive a delivery route that takes me across 3 states, mostly overnight hauls, when the highways are empty and the world feels like it's asleep. I've always preferred driving at night. It's quiet, peaceful, until you see things that make you wish you weren't alone out there. This story happened about 4 years ago, somewhere in northern Nevada. It was around 2 in the morning when I pulled into a rest stop off mile 59. Just a random spot off the interstate, surrounded by nothing but desert and sagebrush. My plan was simple: use the restroom, stretch my legs, and get back on the road. The place looked normal enough. A single building with bathrooms, vending machines, and a few dim lights flickering across the parking lot. There was one other car there, a faded blue sedan parked near the end. Engine off, no one inside. When I stepped out of my truck, the wind hit me hard. That dry, cold desert wind that seems to whistle through your ears. Everything around me was dead silent except for the hum of the highway in the distance. Inside, the men's restroom smelled like bleach and dust. 2 stalls, 1 urinal, a cracked mirror, and buzzing fluorescent lights that made the room look sickly yellow. As I was washing my hands, I noticed something carved into the corner of the mirror. Faint but readable. "Don't stay here after 2:15. It caught my attention because I glanced at my phone. 2:08 a.m. At first I laughed it off. Probably just some random graffiti from a bored traveler. Still, something about the way it was carved, clean, deliberate, made it look recent. When I left the restroom, the parking lot looked emptier than before. The blue sedan's headlights were now on, but the car still hadn't moved. I stared at it for a second. I could see someone sitting in the driver's seat, head turned slightly toward me. I walked back toward my truck, but I could feel that person watching me the entire time. When I started the engine, the sedan's headlights turned off. A few seconds later, they flicked back on. High beams this time. The light hit my mirrors and flooded my cab. I squinted and raised my hand to block the glare. The high beam stayed on for maybe 10 seconds, then went off again. I thought maybe the driver was signaling something, like they needed help. But there was something off about the timing. It didn't feel random. It felt like they were trying to see how I'd react. Then the sedan started rolling forward. Slowly. It pulled up behind my truck and stopped. I waited. Nothing happened. Finally, I decided to just leave. I put my truck in drive, merged back onto the highway, and figured that was the end of it. About 10 minutes later, I noticed headlights behind me. Same faded blue tint, same distance. At first, I didn't panic. Maybe it was just another driver heading the same direction. But every time I changed lanes or slowed down, that car did the exact same thing. It followed me for almost 20 miles. I tried to tell myself I was overreacting. But then I remembered the words on that mirror. Don't stay here after 2:15. I looked at my dashboard clock. 2:31 a.m. My chest tightened. That's when I saw something in the rearview mirror that made my blood run cold. The sedan's passenger side window was rolled down. A man's hand, pale, long fingers, was hanging out the window, waving slowly. Not a normal wave, more like he was motioning for me to pull over. I pressed harder on the gas, pushing up to 80 miles per hour. The road was dead straight. No other cars for miles. But when I looked again, the sedan was gone. Completely gone. No turnoffs, no exits, no lights behind me. Just open desert. For the next few minutes, I drove in total silence, trying to calm myself down. I told myself it could have been a trick of the road. Maybe the headlights dipped in the distance. But about 15 minutes later, I saw something that made every hair on my arm stand up. Up ahead, on the right side of the road, was the same rest stop. I know how insane that sounds. I was sure I hadn't turned around. My GPS still showed me heading east, away from where I started. But there it was. The same building, same vending machines, same broken light flickering above the bathrooms, and parked in the same spot was the blue sedan. Engine off, headlights dark. I didn't stop. I just slowed down enough to look as I passed. The driver's side door was open, but no one was inside. On the roof of the car was a piece of paper, white, fluttering in the wind. I didn't stop to grab it, but I saw what was written in thick black marker. You shouldn't have left. I drove the rest of that night without stopping once. By sunrise, I was across the state line, shaking, exhausted, and completely paranoid. When I got to my drop-off location, I asked a local guy about that rest stop. He looked confused and told me there isn't a rest stop on mile 59. Only an abandoned way station that burned down years ago. I checked my dashcam later that week. From the moment I left the restroom, the footage glitched and turned to static. It came back for exactly 5 seconds, showing an empty stretch of desert highway. And then, the last frame froze. You can see the back of my truck. And just behind it, faintly visible in the dark, a pair of headlights, flickering like they were turning off and on again. I don't drive night routes anymore. I switched to daytime deliveries the following month. Sometimes, though, when I'm on a long stretch of highway, I still check my mirrors. And once in a while, I swear I catch a glimpse of that same faded blue glow far behind me, just for a second before it disappears. If you ever find yourself driving through northern Nevada and you see a rest stop around mile 59, keep driving, because whatever's waiting there, it's not human. I used to work as a night cleaner at a small office complex outside Denver. It wasn't a glamorous job, but it paid better than most overnight gigs. Probably because no one else wanted to be alone in that building after dark. I started in 2019, right after losing my previous job. My shift ran from 10 p.m. to 5 a.m., and I was the only one in the entire 3-floor building after security left at 10. The first few weeks were uneventful. It was quiet, predictable, even peaceful. Until the night, I realized I wasn't as alone as I thought. Most of the cleaning happened on the second floor. Rows of cubicles, conference rooms, and glass offices for managers. The building was built in the 80s and had that faint smell of old carpet and dust, no matter how many times you scrubbed. One night around 1 a.m., I was mopping near the elevators when I heard what sounded like typing coming from one of the offices. That was weird. No one should have been there. I turned off my music, listened, and sure enough, there it was. Click, 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 click. It wasn't just random noise. It was steady, like someone was working at a keyboard. I followed the sound down the hall, heart starting to race a little. It led me to Office 2B, an empty manager's office. When I peeked in, the computer monitor was off, black screen, but the sound of typing was still there, echoing faintly in the air. Then it just stopped. Silence. I stepped closer, shining my flashlight over the desk. The keyboard was clean, undisturbed. No sign of anyone. I brushed it off, thinking maybe it was air vents rattling something, or my imagination playing tricks. But I swear, I could still smell cigarette smoke. Faint but fresh, even though the building had been non-smoking for decades. A week later, the janitorial company assigned me an extra task: to clean a storage room on the first floor that hadn't been used in a while. The supervisor told me the key was taped inside the main supply closet. When I found the key, it was old and rusted. The tag said B1, the basement. I didn't even know there was a basement. After midnight, I found the door behind the vending machines, narrow metal and half painted over. It looked like no one had opened it in years. When I turned the key, it took real force to twist. The hinges screeched when the door opened. A cold draft hit me immediately. Concrete stairs led down into darkness. The air smelled stale, like mold and wet paper. I turned on my flashlight and started down. At the bottom was a small room. A few filing cabinets, old chairs, broken printers stacked against the wall. But on the far side, there was another door. No label, no handle, just a push plate and a black smudge above it, like someone's handprint burned into the metal. I pushed it open. Inside was different. The walls were brick, not drywall. A single desk sat in the middle with a yellowed lamp turned on, flickering faintly. No outlets were visible anywhere near it. And next to the desk was an ashtray filled to the brim with half-smoked cigarettes. The smell hit me instantly. The same smoke from upstairs. I was frozen for a moment, my light shaking in my hand. Then I noticed the papers on the desk, stacks of old employee records, each file stamped terminated. But what made me back away was a photo at the very top. It was me. My employee ID photo, printed and stapled to a form dated 2 days before I was hired. I dropped the flashlight. The beam spun across the room, landing on the far wall, where something moved. It was a shadow, human-shaped, standing perfectly still. But there was no one there. I grabbed the light and bolted up the stairs, slammed the basement door shut, and shoved one of the vending machines halfway in front of it. I didn't go back down there again. 2 nights later, I told my supervisor about the basement. He looked confused and said, "There's no basement access in that building. It's sealed off." I swore to him I'd been down there, even offered to show him the key. But when I checked the supply closet, the key was gone. That night, around 3 a.m., the office phone on the front desk started ringing. It startled me because no one ever called after hours. I picked it up and said, "Maintenance." Nothing. Just static. Then a faint voice whispered, "You left the light on. I slammed the receiver down so hard it cracked. I checked every office, every floor. All the lights were off, except one. Office 2B, the same one where I'd heard typing the week before. The lamp on the desk was glowing faintly, but the computer was still unplugged. I left the building early that night and called in sick the next day. I thought about quitting, but I needed the money. So I went back 2 nights later. The building felt wrong, like the air was thicker. Every sound echoed too long. When I got to the second floor, I noticed something strange. All the chairs in the cubicles had been turned to face the hallway. Dozens of them, perfectly aligned. That's not something anyone would do by accident. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Then the elevator dinged. It opened. Empty. I didn't remember calling it. I turned my light toward the elevator and saw, for just a split second, a reflection in the mirrored panel. A man standing behind me. Older, smoking. When I turned around, the hallway was empty, but the smell of cigarette smoke was so strong it made my eyes water. My final night there was in December. The snow outside made the building even quieter. Just the faint hum of the heater and the occasional creak of settling pipes. Around 2 a.m., I heard the typing again. But this time, it wasn't just from one office. It was from everywhere. All around me, echoing through the cubicles like 100 invisible people working. I grabbed my keys, ready to run. But then I saw the elevator light turn on by itself. It went from 1 to 2, then 3, then stopped. I stood frozen, watching the numbers flicker. After a few seconds, it started descending again. 3, 2, 1. Then a faint ding. The doors opened. Inside was a single sheet of paper on the floor. I stepped closer and picked it up. It was another employee termination form. Name, my name. Effective date, December 13th, 2019. That was today's date. Then the lights went out. Every single one. The typing stopped. And from the darkness behind me, I heard a man's voice whisper, gravelly, low, right next to my ear. You left the light on again. I dropped everything and ran out into the snow. Didn't even lock the door. When I got home, I called my supervisor to quit. He didn't answer. A woman picked up instead and said, "Sir, this number's been disconnected for years." The cleaning service closed down in 2005. I never went back to that building. I drove past it once, about 6 months later. It was empty. Windows boarded up. A "for lease" sign in the front yard. But through the glass doors, I could still see faint light flickering from the second floor, like the glow of a desk lamp left on too long. And sometimes, on cold nights, I still smell cigarette smoke out of nowhere. It follows me into parking garages, elevators, even my car. I try to tell myself it's in my head. But deep down, I know it's not. Because whoever, or whatever, I met in that basement never clocked out.